At this point in the education reform movement, I think we're beginning to see that the diversity of models, of school models themselves, is actually really, really critical. Because students are different, right? You guys know that. So one school model is not going to meet all students' needs. And so as the sector has started to evolve, we have some really great examples up here today of people who have...
Hey, I didn't think you said that. You had better. I'm Tamika Peters. I'm a technology teacher. Also, I'm running the summer camp.
I knew we had some special powers here, but who threw their voice? So I think we may be hearing someone next door right now. So maybe Hillary, you can go figure that out. Okay, I think we're good now. And so we're going to be hearing about these different models, have some questions to actually think about what led to these models, what are lessons that these leaders have learned, and obviously create some opportunity for you all to ask questions of the people up here, because I think that's going to be really important and critical. So my role is going to be mostly question asker and really trying to manage time so that we get to the place to give you all as much opportunity as possible to ask questions. So thanks for coming. My name is Josh Griggs. I am Teach for America's Chief Administrative Officer. It's a mouthful that basically means...
And come closer. Just come closer.
All right. If you all want to come closer, feel free. As the Chief Administrative Officer, it's just a fancy title that means I oversee a lot of the operations of running the organization. Finance, technology, legal affairs, real estate and facilities, and human resources. I was a 2003 core member in New York City. I taught in the East Bronx, 3rd grade and 4th grade. My kids are now 19 and 20. Multiple of my former students have interned with me at Teach for America. And we have a couple this summer, actually, between their freshman and sophomore year. And I'm really, really excited to be here today with this great group of people. So I'm just going to say a little bit about each person up here. Just essentially what is their school model or the network that they're leading. Each one of these people is quite accomplished, and it could take me 5 minutes to tell you everything they've accomplished. And if you're curious about learning more about them personally, you should look at the Teach for America app on your phone, because we have their bios and more information about them. So I'm just going to start here and go down the line. First, we have Pablo Villavicencio, hopefully I did okay, who has led the Bronx Bridges Charter School. And you'll get to hear. Thank you. I actually appreciate that a lot. So the Bronx Bridges School, which is a district school, and he'll be sharing more about his model. We have Sarah Kottner, who is the CEO of Montessori for All, next to Pablo. And next to Sarah, we have Christy Dragon, who's the CEO for Citizens for All Charter Schools. Okay, Citizens of the World Charter Schools. This is interesting. That didn't sound right to me, given our previous conversations. Citizens of the World Charter Schools, and we have Preston Smith, who is the CEO of Rocket Ship Education, the network of Rocket Ship Charter Schools. So what I'd like to do is actually just start by asking each person to spend about 5 to 7 minutes sharing a little bit about their model, so you can just get the baseline information of what is their model, how is it potentially different from some of the schools that we see both in district and the no excuse college prep charter model. So with that, I will start with Pablo.
Great, so can everyone hear me? Yeah, good. Hello? Okay. Is that better? I guess. Thanks guys for the thumbs up in the back. So my name is Pablo Villavicencio. I really wanted to sort of give a context for the work that we're doing in New York City. There are about 300,000, if I'm not mistaken, 300,000 English language learners or former English language learners
So, big problem.
in the city of New York. And for a very long time, just as in other places around the country, we've really struggled, especially with adolescent English language learners. And the truth is that they're one of the most marginalized populations including special education students. And often our students are both special education and English language learners. And so in my particular district, given that New York City is 1.4 million children, in my small region of the Bronx, we have a 10% graduation rate for this population. So in District 8, there's 10%, and that's a very small number. What happens often is that students come from West Africa, Latin America, often with very limited school experience, reading in their native language in the first or second grade level, and then placed within high schools that often are not able to meet their needs. And so through a lot of the reforms that happened during the Bloomberg administration, the Office of Portfolio Planning, they decided to open up schools that would really target this population of students. And I proposed an idea of a school that would really create sort of holistic wraparound services for these students in attempts to really address their particular issues. And our student population, just to give you a sense of who they are 40% undocumented, 99.1% free and reduced lunch. They're 70% from Latin America, 20% from Bangladesh, speaking Bengali, about 7% from West Africa. Most of their parents speak French, but they speak Mandingo, Fulani, Twi, a multiple of languages that usually are not very represented in our school system, but are growing in the Bronx. And then a 3 to 4% Yemeni population speaks Arabic. And so most of our students, when we do their baselines in their native language, are reading at a first grade, 7th month level. They've had very limited numeracy skills, and in the state of New York, we're required to have exit exams to graduate. So there's no waiver. These students have to pass an English exam that's written for a 10th or 11th grade level. They have to pass the algebra exam, the biology, living environment. Many of our students didn't even have sciences. So you can imagine the challenge of this. And so we decided that we would really we committed ourselves to 4 promises to our students. We founded the school in 2010. And the first promise is to really know a student, to know each of our students as people and as students. And we do that through a lot of just getting inventories, getting to know who they are. They're all clustered in family groups, so that every student is with a small group of 10 students, and that adult is with them through 4 years of their experience, meeting with them 2 to 3 times a week, really advocating for the student and getting to know. The other way we really do that is through a lot of our curriculum that's culturally responsive, gives access points to our students to really say, I can actually identify with this. For many of our students who are taking US history, they've never heard of George Washington. And so we try to give it in context of like, well, this is the structure of government. These are government structures that you may be familiar with. This is the equivalent in our country. The other pillar, or the other promise we make as part of our mission is to help you become a better student, to become smarter, and then to really be able to communicate in English and your native language. We strongly believe in bilingual education, that really transferring the skills from the first language to the second language is incredibly important. And often kids who are placed in schools are learning algebra in English when they know algebra, but they don't know English, so therefore really lose that content. The other is to explore your passion and interest. We partner with a multitude of CBOs in our neighborhood, in particular Good Shepherd Services, that really gets to explore who they are. We have a very large amount of just interests that are culturally based, but also just for them to have access to American culture. And then the last is really to help them prepare for post-secondary success. We don't necessarily just define that as going to college. We also define that as having the option to go to college, whether it looks like it's 5 or 6 years down the line, with the reality of working, or really developing a vocation or a craft that's going to give them autonomy and choice in their adult life. And so, we started with this pop 9th graders. We just had our first graduating class. I mentioned that it's 10% in our particular district. I'm very pleased to announce that our first graduating class was 2 weeks ago, and we had, for the June graduation, 60% of our students graduate without any sort of every student's welcomed. Meeting all the criteria in the 5 regions, and we're hoping for another 20% for the August graduation. We sort of just lump it in as our 2014 graduates. And I think the difference, especially hearing what our kids articulated back to us in our graduation, was that they felt that there was a school that really knew who they were, and that took the time to really develop not only their skills as students, but as people. And that we took the additional step to really engage their families, as most of our parents did not go to school themselves or graduate from high schools. And so we did a lot of work around parent engagement that we'll talk a little bit about later. So that's Bronx Bridges High School in Bronx.
All right, I'm Sarah from Montessori for All. A couple of years ago, the Washington Post published an article, and they were exploring this phenomenon they called the Montessori Mafia. And they were noticing that several people from the creative elite had all graduated from Montessori schools. So the founders of Google, the creator of Amazon, and the designer of Wikipedia, they had all graduated from Montessori schools, which you may or may not know really focus on developing self-directed learners who know how to identify their passions and pursue them, who are developed in a holistic way, academically, intellectually, socially, emotionally, creatively, culturally, physically. And so I found my way into Montessori and created Montessori for All in order to create more access, because in the United States there are more than 5,000 private Montessori schools, and there are only 500 public Montessori programs. And in the town where I live right now, which is Austin, Texas, which a couple of years ago had the second greatest achievement gap in major urban areas behind Washington, D.C., which is crazy if you can imagine. But we have 0 Montessori options. We have more than 20 private Montessori schools, and they're all west of the interstate. So that's how Montessori for All was founded, and we endeavor to open and lead high-performing, authentic Montessori charter schools in diverse cities nationwide. And we strive to create schools that are racially, culturally, and socioeconomically diverse, because we think part of the problem in our country is that a lot of our charter schools are contributing to the resegregation and continued segregation of our cities. So that's one of the things that we're focusing on. We are opening our first school in 2 weeks in Austin. We're opening with 3-year-olds through 3rd grade and adding a grade level every year through 8th grade. And one of the things we're really focusing on is how do we truly close the gap? Because so many of our highest performing charter schools are doing an amazing job of creating schools that are helping children outperform their neighborhood schools. But when you look at the children across town, in the wealthiest parts of town, there's still an enormous gap. And so we're really focused on how do we close that gap. And one of the things we're doing to close the gap is starting with children as young as 3. And our nonprofit is actually creating an infant and toddler program, because there's so much brain development that happens from 0 to 3 years old. And so eventually we want to run our program down to birth and even prenatal education. The other thing we're looking at is truly differentiating instruction. When you differentiate, all children make the most efficient and effective progress possible. But the problem is then the children who are already high performing continue to be high performing. So we're looking at using response to intervention to really create additional opportunities for academic support to help close those gaps. And then the other piece of it is just culturally responsive education and making sure that we are truly bringing our children's identities and communities into the classroom to affirm and help them build from that base. So we're really excited about the work that lies ahead.
Hi, my name is Christy Dragon, and I am the CEO at Citizens of the World Charter Schools. And our organization was born actually on a parallel track to my own effort to find the school for my children. So I have 3 kids. I have a 15-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, and I have a 5-year-old. I had my first child as a first-year corps member, which might not have been the most strategic thing to do, but I did it nonetheless. And so right away in this educational process, both growing as a professional, I was also growing as a parent. And so I was navigating our public system as a parent. And I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, so I grew up in a very segregated community. I love it. Josh actually lives in Atlanta, too, still. I grew up in the 70s there, dating myself a little bit, and it was very segregated when I was growing up. And so as a mixed race kid, we talked a lot about race and class. And so I was so excited for my kids because we lived in Hollywood, California, and every kind of diversity imaginable is present there. So I had this idea that I was going to start looking at public schools and I was going to find this oasis of diversity that reflected the diversity of the neighborhood, and my kids therefore were going to have this very different experience. But I didn't find that. I actually found very segregated schools that were low performing and so struggled a lot. So created Citizens of the World in 2009. I partnered actually with a former board chair of the Teach for America Advisory Board. I used to be on staff at Teach for America. And he believed so much in this idea of creating community engaged, diverse, high performing schools that he fully funded our first school, our Hollywood School, which is our flagship. And shortly after opening, we had more applications than we had spots. And our first round of standardized test data put us in the top 6% of Los Angeles Unified School District schools. And for those of you who know LAUSD, it's the second largest school district in the country, so there's about 840 schools in LAUSD. So shortly after opening Hollywood, we were grateful to welcome in two more champions, Cam Sterrett and Chris Foreman. And these individuals, Mark Gordon, Cam Sterrett, and Chris Foreman, are the national board members for Citizens of the World now. We launched a national network in 2011. And we put a couple stakes in the ground when we launched this network. First was we were only going to seek to apply for schools and school openings in neighborhoods that were naturally diverse. So I don't sit up here today and pretend that I have some magic mixture of how to create the best educational conditions for kids. It's more that when I look across our country, there are so many cities that are naturally diverse, that have rich diversity, and that diversity is not actually reflected in the neighborhood schools. So that was one thing we committed to. The second was we committed to this idea of local leadership and community. We know deep down that when you authentically engage community members and leaders, excellence can sustain and change can be lasting. And so we built a governance model that's very different than other charter management organizations, but the goal was to try to manage really high quality with community leadership. And then finally, we decided to go kindergarten through 12th grade. So we can't do that right away by law in some places, but we talk about that from the beginning because we found that when you have a diverse population, if you can show a path all the way to high school, you're more likely to maintain that diversity all the way through, which makes a lot of sense for me as a parent anyway. So if you look at our data, we have 3 schools right now in California, 2 schools in New York, and we're actively talking to other cities. But interestingly enough, they tend to be cities that come to us because either they want our model reflected in their city, or a group of parents has even come together in one of the cities and put out a request for proposal trying to find a school like ours to come in. It's really inspiring because parent demand and parent partnership is a huge part of our model. So network-wide, if you look at the population of our students, you'll find that 38% of them self-identify as Caucasian, about 21% of them identify as African-American, and 27% Latino-Latina, with other percentages falling to fill up that 100%. Just over 50%, I think 51% of our families qualify for free introduced lunch. About 25% of our kids are designated as English language learners, and we're running at just about 10% of our kids who are receiving special education or have special needs that have been identified. So much more diverse than local schools, much closer matched to the neighborhood, and I'll be honest and tell you something that everyone told us was not possible when we started, that people told me people didn't really want to go to school together. And that's not what we're finding at all. And then the last statistic that I'll leave you with is just our demand. So we had 2,300 applications in LA for about 271 spots. And in New York, we had 869 applications for about 170-ish spots. So we're getting between 5 and 10 applications for every open seat, which is something that actually keeps me up at night because there are people who want seats at schools, and schools that maybe have models that look like ours. Maybe they're actually looking for something different. But I think that when people want into the public system, they're expressing their confidence in the importance of public education, and I just hope we can start offering options that allow everybody who wants in to come in.
Hi, I'm Preston, CEO of Rocket Ship. First off, thank you everyone for giving your time during the summer coming out and what you do each and every day. So thanks for being here, really appreciate it. So Rocket Ship, I'm gonna talk a little bit about it, but I think background is a little bit helpful. I started as a Teach for America district teacher in San Jose. That was 2001, so right when No Child Left Behind came around, and scripted programs were, they were the thing, and I would get monitored and have my literacy coach would come by and make sure I was on page 23, because that was how you taught literacy all at the same time on the same page. So that was the era in which I grew up as a teacher, and went to a guided reading conference my first year and was amazed at this profound way to teach reading. And when my reading coach was in my room, began to implement that and saw really great stuff. And later on, was approached by a community organization and was able to found a district school within my district. And so we had certain autonomies, and so we were allowed to really pursue different approaches in instruction. And we, the Coalition for Essential Schools, so I'm dating myself there too, people probably have no idea what that is in this room. But they would do things like exhibition nights, and they did things like starting off the day through a lunch or a song and dance and guided reading. And so we had this opportunity to really be autonomous in instruction, in small groups, and things like that. And then 6 months into opening that district school, they took autonomous out of our name, and the writing was kind of on the wall. We became a small school, not a small autonomous school. And so 3 years later, that led to Rocket Ship. And so I guess two things to kind of really think about with Rocket Ship. One, Lucha was the name of the district school that I started, and that was 220, we served 225 kids. It was a great school, fourth best in the state of California for low-income students when I left, an amazing school, and that was 225 students. And the Teach for America motto is one day, all children will attain an excellent education. And so what had really been motivating me, what still motivates me to this day is I'd really like for us to determine that day. I'd like us to put it in writing and go after it. And so the mission and vision of Rocket Ship is we're going to eliminate the achievement gap in our lifetimes. And we're not going to do it by ourselves. It's going to take a bunch of models and a bunch of folks, but we're going to aggressively pursue innovations that allow us to reach as many kids as possible, as quickly as possible, and debunk any myths about what kids can achieve, and so that someday we walk out and say, hey, there's a bigger problem than the achievement gap for us to worry about in our society. So that really motivated us. And so if you take that thought process to kind of the next extension, the question is, well, how do you have a model that allows you to replicate and allows you to scale and do so with incredible quality? That's really, really challenging. And so that's where Rocket Ship was really born. So we're a nonprofit, public schools. We have 11 schools right now. We're opening up in Nashville in a couple weeks, so go Tennessee. So come down Dickerson Pike and you'll check out our campus. We're gonna open up with immediately 500 students. So we open big schools. We come after it right away. We don't believe in kind of grade by grade. We believe if we're starting a school that you need to start eliminating the achievement gap right there and then. We've grown over 6 years from 160 students to 6,000 kids. And so 11 schools, maybe a little bit, I think it hides our true numbers. 85% are low income, about 85% are English language learners, and in California, our Bay Area schools were in the top 5% of low-income districts in the state. And our scores are going up. We'll release those in a month as well, so we're really proud. We'll probably be in the top 2 or 3% this year. So really excited about how our schools are doing. But one of the things we're mainly known for is blended learning, and so I want to kind of talk about that because we really have 3 pillars. And if you listen to Rocket Ship talk, we don't talk about blended learning much. Blended learning is often, I think, framed as if you put a computer in your classroom or one-to-one devices, like, you're blended. And for us, that's not what blended learning means. So our first pillar is about personalized learning, which really is the question of how do you get to each unique child's needs, the right content for the right student at the right time, and do it in the right mode, which sometimes is technology, but oftentimes is many other things. And I think just first and foremost, that's at least our second pillar, which is around teachers and leaders. Rocket Ship is made of incredibly talented leaders and educators in our schools. We have amazing people who just do incredible things. And so at the end of the day, what we really have been consumed with at Rocket Ship is this is going to take great people to eliminate the achievement gap. This isn't going to be robots running around a room teaching kids. No online program is ever going to completely solve this. This is going to come down to great people. And so the question is, how do you optimize our kids' times so they're getting what they need at the right time? But then also, how do you optimize our teachers' time so that our teachers are doing what they are best at doing with our kids, and getting that supplemented through technology, through tutoring, through kids doing things independently, through enrichment and play, all sorts of things which happen all on our campuses, but it's still pretty ridiculous, and this still happens at Rocketship, but our kindergarten teachers are doing letter sounds with our kids, and these are phenomenal folks who got really gone to amazing schools and very qualified. Some have masters, and they're sitting and saying with a kid. Probably not the most optimal use of our teachers' time, right? So we really stepping back. If we can figure that out, we can probably eliminate the achievement gap, and we can scale that and do amazing things. So that's the second pillar, which is around teachers and leaders. And our third one is around parent engagement. We're really deeply involved with our parents. We do a ton of stuff with our parents, but the biggest thing we do is really honor the fact that our parents are our kids' first teachers, and honor that they're already leaders. Empowerment is not real. People already have power. The question is, how do you help them really access their leadership and then access folks in power so they can really push on the system? And so our folks at Rocketship, our parents are incredible. Over the past 4 years, we've seen our parents open up 7 additional middle and high schools, not for Rocketship, but other quality school options for our kids. We've seen parents get elected to school board. We're seeing like real change and a movement that's really grassroots and on the ground, and which is really powerful. So that's our model, and that's what we do.
Yeah, let's give them all a hand. I gotta say, we threw about every possible obstacle at them, which was take away their presentations, take away their microphones, and kind of see what happened. And I'm just totally impressed with how grounded you all are and what you're doing. And I suspect it has something to do with the work that you do in your schools is connected to something about who you are. Right? And so it's not like you're remembering some bullet points or, right? Like you're talking about yourself as you're sharing your model with us. And we heard so much and so many of what you said about your authentically understanding kids. As much as is possible, we're going to go a little inside the actor's studio with this question. And as much as possible, we give these 200 people a sense of who you are, right? Like what is the personal experience you've had? And that has led to the connection to the model that you have developed. And we're going to have everyone go. We'll just start with Pablo and get on the line.
So, my school is focused on English language learners, and I am an English language learner. I actually learned how to speak, read, write, and listen to English around the age of 7, 8, 9 through Reading Rainbow and Sesame Street, yes, PBS Public, and that's great. One of the things so my parents are Ecuadorian. They immigrated a little bit later in life and went back and forth quite a bit. And for those of you that do work with immigrant populations, sometimes you see that back and forth. Like my parents really struggled with the educational system. I have an older brother that was going to a lot of schools that were very mediocre in LA Unified School System in East LA. That's where I grew up. My parents really struggled with this idea of wire schools. They just thought all American schools, unless you're rich or were sending them to Catholic school or private school, were going to have no options. And so it wasn't until really the 8th grade that my parents understood, actually we do have a value for education, or mother more, because my father didn't really have that value for education, but it was like, there must be another option. And they learned that they could falsify our address to send me to a different school system. And so I often share that my story is pretty in pink. I was on the wrong side of the track. I didn't want anyone to see where I lived. I was going to a school that was very affluent, in a Blue Ribbon Award school in California. In the suburb, that's median income was $130,000. My family income was about $18,000 at the time. And so I really did grow up and understand the real effect of poverty in homes. And so I went from being a C, a mediocre student, to quickly catching up. The school invested. I was probably the only free and reduced student, to be honest. And they invested a lot in me. And as a result of that, I was able to get to I went to the University of California, Berkeley. I got scholarships to other places. My entire trajectory of my life changed, and therefore changed the trajectory of my entire family as a result of the opportunity that I was given from this high school. And as I became more politically aware at Berkeley, I realized that this is unfair. Just because my mother had one conversation after church, my entire life changed. And I was doing economic sustainable development work at the time after I graduated and realized actually I want to do education and come back to this idea of what we do for sustainable communities that are often diverse or that offer opportunity for all students who live within that community. And I think ever since my time at Teach for America in New York City Core, I've really been trying to be an advocate for my students, tell them that it's possible. Often my students are motivated by my story, that it is possible to really change your life trajectory often, especially as they become adolescent and more aware of the haves and the haves not, become demoralized by the realities of the challenges that they face. Or the fact that, half of my student population has to work, often in kitchens or other places, and other people don't. But really giving them a sense that even though that's the case, that they can do it, that it's, we talk about malleable intelligence, we talk about your life is not determined, that education really offers social mobility. And it really speaks to sort of our core beliefs. And one of the other things I just wanted to do, the key thing that the second high school, that Walnut High School did for me was that it really gave me an identity that said that you're valued and that you're important. And it was those teachers and educators that it really instilled in me. It didn't matter where I came from, that who I was important and valued. And so a lot of what we do is try to ingrain that in our students, to embolden them to say, yes, I am important, I am valued, I can really change the trajectory of my life towards opportunity. And so obviously the school clearly connects to sort of my own life trajectory.
The bulk of my educational work-life career has been in no excuses, high-performing charter schools. I did Teach for America in rural Louisiana for 3 years, and then I moved to work at the original KIPP school in Houston, and then worked as a consultant for schools like Achievement First and Uncommon Schools and Yes Prep Public Schools. And that was my world for a long time, because in that world, everyone believes that all children can learn, and we don't make any excuses, and we do whatever it takes. And that's such an inspiring, amazing place to be, and I learned so much within those communities. But after a while, I started really thinking about what felt like this factory model of education, with trying to teach everyone the same thing at the same time in the same way. It didn't feel like we were truly preparing children for the world beyond. And in addition to that, there's a Howard Fuller quote that I love. He says, "Our job is not to prepare children for the 21st century. Our job is to prepare children to transform the 21st century." And I really felt like in the places I was working, we believed that, but we were structuring our schools in ways that did not actually support that. We were emphasizing a lot of obedience and compliance and following directions. And as a white woman in a classroom full of children of color, I felt like there was something fundamentally wrong about me standing up there demanding compliance and obedience, when really I want the children to go out and cause a revolution. And so that pushed me to start searching for alternate models of education. And I observed at some elite private schools in Houston, and just walked into a Montessori classroom randomly, and within 2 minutes I just knew my whole life needed to change, because instead of looking like a factory with desks facing a teacher, it looked like a Google workplace. Everyone was doing something different. There was a boy sitting on the floor learning decimals with his hands-on concrete material. He wasn't chanting, he wasn't memorizing algorithms, he was actually deeply internalizing and understanding mathematics. There was another student who was meeting with the teacher to plan her goals for the week. Another child was independently studying her spelling words. There was a snack on the counter. When the children were hungry, they could help themselves and clean up after themselves. There was a bathroom in the classroom. No one was lining them up and squirting hand sanitizer in their hands and timing them to go through the bathroom. I was like, wow, this looks like the world. And it really just struck me like, yes, like if we want to prepare children for the world, we have to create classrooms that are microcosms of that world and provide them with guidance and direction to help them assume and reach their fullest potential. And so I went and got my Montessori certification and worked in public Montessori programs back in the district. I worked in Denver and in Houston, but being back in a district school, I missed everything about my Teach for America, KIPP, Achievement First world. People left and right were just making excuses about why the test scores were low, or why the kids couldn't learn, or this kid has this family, comes from this family, so we're not going to make any progress with that kid. And that, I couldn't handle that for very long, and that's how Montessori for All was born, this idea of getting back into the charter world so that we have more autonomy, we can blend the best of what's happening in high-performing, no excuses charter schools, like high levels of personal responsibility and accountability, data-driven decision-making, but blend it with more progressive approaches that truly educate the whole child. And one thing I forgot from my previous question, since I didn't have my slides and I got nervous, was just the overarching goal. We have a four-pronged approach to change in our organization. The first one is to start and lead high-performing, authentic Montessori schools that blend the best of no excuses charter schools with Montessori. The second one is just to codify everything that we do, because a lot of times in charters, we do amazing things, but then we don't share it back out and actually impact the district. So we want to codify everything so we're prepared to do that. The third thing we want to do is start teacher training centers so we can blend Montessori certification with state certification. And then finally, we want to partner with districts, because we're not convinced that charters are going to take over the world. So we want to get back in the districts, and then we'll have the teacher training centers where they can send teachers, and we'll have the curriculum that's already codified. So that was for the previous question, but I'll stop talking now and pass to Chris.
So my mother is an immigrant from the Philippines, and my father grew up in housing projects just outside of Birmingham. So growing up in what I've already described as a pretty racially segregated community, we also talked a lot about class, and we talked a lot about education, because my father, in particular, had transcended, frankly, his reality. Right? He had a path that was very different than his siblings even. He had gone to high school, gone to college on a full scholarship, and literally because someone on a bus sitting next to him one day offered to pay for his college, and he took him up on it. And then he went on to law school, and he's actually a practicing attorney. And so with all of these educational opportunities came all these life choices that very close people to us and our family loved ones didn't have, because they didn't have the same opportunities given to them. So I felt like that was sort of a stage well set for what ended up happening later in my life. I went on to law school. I went to the University of Alabama for college, and I think at the time it was not a typical Teach for America recruitment place, so I had not heard of Teach for America at the University of Alabama. But then I went on to law school at the University of Georgia, and in my third year, I liked law school. I thought it was super challenging. I did not find myself leaping out of bed to practice law, and so that was a little disturbing, because I was getting closer and closer to graduation and wasn't sure what I was going to do with this law degree. But my third year, we had a third-year practice act that actually allowed us to try cases in places where there weren't enough attorneys. So I was able to try cases in juvenile court on the defense side, and I represented clients who were under the age of 10. They were all African American, all boys, all repeat offenders, on trial for things like curfew violations, and they were being presented to the judge shackled, literally, sometimes at the wrist and the ankle. And so there was something in what I was seeing that was just horrifying and enraging. And that led me to actually start volunteering in their schools, thinking maybe I could get my arms around what could be different that could keep kids from ending up in this court-involved stage of life. And that's when I first saw the achievement gap, because I walked into these schools, and these are in the same state that I had gone to public school myself, but the schools were just not presenting the same educational opportunities for these kids that I had by a function of our zip code, frankly. So that got me pretty fired up, and it's how I came to Teach for America. I think there is something really important about the fact that I was looking for a school for my own children, because the truth is, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, like, the achievement gap is something that we have got to do something about. I know everybody in this room is dedicating the majority of their time waking, and probably hours of sleep as well, thinking about that, doing something about it. But through a search for my own children's school, I came to believe that closing the achievement gap alone won't be enough. And I've been really gun-shy to talk about this, because what I'm afraid people are going to hear me saying is that somehow I don't value academic data, or I don't think test scores are important, or I'm not really about equity. And given my background, like, equity and opportunity and equality, they're all incredibly core to me. But there seemed something off to me in the fact that when I was looking for schools for my kids, I wasn't just looking at achievement scores. I just wasn't just looking at content mastery. I was looking for all these other things. I was looking for a place where they would develop themselves. I was looking for a place where they would learn to collaborate and work with others. And I was looking for a place that would hold them accountable for thinking about their role in the world. And so that's actually what we are trying to create at Citizens of the World. And it's really hard, but we're trying. And so our purpose statement, the reason we exist, is to actually maximize human potential. And we hope to do that by strengthening the bonds among us and by creating true citizens of the world. And hopefully that purpose statement will resonate 200 years from now. Our mission statement actually, so what we hope to accomplish in the next 10 to 30 years is we'd like to impact and expand the way we define an excellent education. We want to think differently about what it contains, requires, and accomplishes, because we believe there is a social, emotional, a cultural competence, skills around grit and perseverance and courage to fail even, that need to be part of the discussion, need to be measured as rigorously as we measure some of the academic outcomes.
So I grew up in the Inland Empire, which is Southern California, IE. Yeah, so IE, good. It's often fondly referred to as the armpit of Southern California. So I went to school, went to public schools, district schools, and it was kind of the story, you know, there wasn't no child left behind, so teachers liked you and they treated you nice, and you went to school, and my parents, you know, always told me I was going to college. My dad had been the first in his family to graduate from college. My mom got her AA while I was growing up, so when we were going to college, we didn't really understand the quality of our schools, I don't think, and that wasn't really clear to me until high school. I had a teacher who used to write our zip code on he was a great teacher, so but probably not the most effective method, but he would write our zip code on the blackboard to remind us that we were from 92376 and that would follow us all our lives. And I didn't really get it, and I didn't get it until I applied to UCLA, and I got denied. And UCLA had been my safe school. I was in love with a young woman. She was a junior, I was a senior, so I wanted to stay close to home. And I graduated second in my class of 1,000. You know, it was 4,000 kids in my high school. Had, you know, good scores, played sports, you know, student body president. I had, you know, everything like that. And was pretty surprised to get denied from UCLA. So I called up the dean and said, hey, what's going on? And this was also kind of fired up because I went to class that day and I was in, you know, AP classes, but I had the regular econ class. And in that class, mostly, you know, track and football players, and basically everyone in that class had gotten into UCLA. And so that was pretty interesting. And so I called him up, and she kind of, you could hear her kind of smirking on the phone, and she said, well, we know about your school. I was like, okay, what does that mean? And she said, your grades are inflated. Like, we know about your school, your grades are inflated. And then she said to me on the phone, we take athletes, not scholars, from your school. And I mean, that's cold hard truth. The cold hard truth too is, you know, in the school where I went to was minority white. I'm a white guy, figured it out, got into college, things worked out. But the reality is for a lot of my classmates, that wasn't the case. And a lot of my classmates, you know, some are in jail, some are gone. My sister dropped out of college in her first semester, never completed college. My older sister, after 7 years, got through the Cal State system. I mean, it's real. I lived it, I experienced it. I went to North Carolina Chapel Hill and spent the first year in remediation English classes. Go Heels! Go Tar Heels. Classes were tough. I don't know what they're saying about the athletes cheating. Is not true. It's very, very, very rigorous. Yeah, I spent the first year in Chapel Hill, remediation English classes, went to tutoring. Like, I had to get my act together because UCLA was right. My grades were inflated and I was not fully prepared for college. And so I lived it, I did it. Our kids, where we serve, 95110, 95116, that's the zip codes of our kids we serve, and they will follow them. And so I want them to follow them knowing that they went to amazing schools, and I hope UCLA and all the other schools take them. So that's why I do what I do.
All right, we're going to do just a couple of questions for individual people, and then we're just going to open it up. So we have like about 3 questions, and then we'll we'll go. So the first question is actually for Christy. And I'm wondering if she can share a little bit with the room about what are some of the lessons you've learned about the differences required to run a school, build a school where the student population has more diversity from an income background relative to a lot of the district schools and charter schools that exist.
Good question, because it's really hard. And I think that on some level, and this may seem obvious, but it takes an organization-wide fundamental commitment to diversity and a pretty sophisticated understanding of what diversity in our country has meant and means today, and very specific to the communities that you're in. And I think then with that understanding, there are probably 3 areas that I would say are fundamentally different, at least from my experience. So the first is that the way we think about academics and academic excellence has to be broader, right? You can't put a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of difference that may never have been discussed in lives to date, and then just expect everything to go well. And the scary thing is, if you just measure academic scores, maybe things will all seem to be going well. But there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in that classroom, and I think down to the choices you make around educational models, there are ways to maximize that diversity that just require a lot of care and thought. Community and family engagement, I mean, the minute you're dealing with a mixed socioeconomic environment, you've got to really just think about how to make sure to meet everybody where they are, how to meaningfully engage people, which also means really getting to know people and getting to know people in ways that are authentic, which is a big lift for school leaders, especially when you mix socioeconomically and you have a privileged and a percentage of your population that's very aware of how social capital plays, that may actually demand more time than you ever would have imagined. And good things can come from all of that, but you just have to be super thoughtful about your structures. And then finally, I would say that there is this, and this has been a learning for me, I wouldn't have said this 2 years ago, and now I probably should have said it first, but when you change something, right, so if you walk around most schools in the neighborhoods where our schools are, the populations don't look like our populations. Now, our populations actually match the neighborhood populations, but that seems to have been lost in translation somewhere. So you suddenly have a school where 40% of the kids or 50% of the kids are Caucasian. And as people are coming into the school, if you haven't gone out in the community and really spent time explaining who you are, what it is you value, what you want to accomplish, people will create their own stories about you. And I find that fighting a narrative that you didn't tell that's not true takes a lot of time and energy from school leaders who are very busy trying to run what is an integrated school model, which is already going to be hard enough. So there are just some external things that I think are very important to keep in mind, and they're going to tie in and wrap around all the things that we haven't done exactly right as a country around race and class. So I think you have to be very prepared for that as well.
So the next question is for Preston. You touched on this a little bit in your introduction, so if you want to expound a little bit, if you're like said most of it, we're good with that too. But it's really about the blended learning, right? You kind of referenced it's like the hype thing right now. People are talking about it. It's going to change education, not just in low-income communities, but in this country, in this world. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit more with us about your philosophy on blended education model and how has it evolved based on things that you've tried and learned.
Yeah, so I definitely think technology is part of the solution if we're going to eliminate the achievement gap. So to be really clear about that, I'll focus. If you read about Rocketship, we did something the last 2 years last 2.5 years where we really kind of shifted our model or piloted something. So we have traditionally done a rotational model, meaning that our kids spend half of their day in a humanities classroom, so they get language arts, and they also get social studies and thematic units. A quarter of their time in what we call kind of our STEM teachers or science and math, and then a quarter of time in the learning lab where they get enrichment and art and PE and things like that, and that's also where they spend time online. And so that was our traditional model. That isn't the model we started with, so we've learned a lot. I'd say if you come to Rocketship every year, something's evolving, something's changing. But by February of our first year, we moved into that rotational model. What we tried over the past 2 years was something we were calling the flexible classroom, and that was really kind of a space like this, a large space where we had about 100 students and 3 teachers and a tutor and the computer. So basically everything our kids get in the rotational model just in the same space. They no longer had to rotate to different spaces. It was all in the same space. No walls, very open space. And that was really, we learned a ton over the past 2 years. I think really super challenging. There were some of the spaces that were pretty successful. There were some of the spaces that really struggled. I think the thing that we learned, and we learned a ton, one was that it was really hard for our teachers to start thinking about that space. Initially, when they moved into that space, they didn't like it. They would actually even kind of break into their own classrooms. So you'd see this open space, and you'd see teachers just literally starting to group up their own kind of 20 to 30 kids and make their own classroom. But by the end, which was really fascinating, was they loved working together and they had started to figure it out. So it really kind of evolved their thinking about teaching. It was really fascinating because we were able to see what teachers were really good at and kind of optimize their time. So rather than a teacher having to do, everything in terms of all levels of kids in literacy, they could focus on specific level kids. They could say, hey, I'm really great at teaching writing, and spend the majority of their day doing that. So it was really fascinating to see kind of the further specialization of teachers in instruction. The other thing we saw is if you have an incredible teacher, they could command 150 kids, and that space was just amazing. And so it really speaks to this exponential power of a great teacher and how we really have kind of capped that. Teachers are still kind of captivated in one classroom, and how do we really get that out of the bottle and spread it. And I think the other thing two other things made us think about was agency. To make that space work, kids have to work independently. I think that's a real challenge in kind of no excuses model. So how do you get kids to work really purposefully, independently and real rigorous and quality work? And so that was really challenging, especially with the number of kids. And so that was a big challenge, and I think we learned a ton, and it's helped our model a lot. And the last thing I'd say it really helped us with is we are starting to integrate the computers into classrooms now. So we weren't doing that in the rotational model before, and now what we've learned, I think it helped our teachers really have ownership over the computers and over the online learning, and so how do they tie that into their instruction, so it's really purposefully supplementing instruction. And so just, I think, a ton of lessons learned. We're not going to be doing the flexible classrooms anymore. The real rationale behind that, it wasn't about results. Like I said, some of the classrooms we saw great results, some of the classrooms we didn't see great results. So it was mixed. The reality there is just to scale it, to grow it. It is really talent dependent right now, and we don't have the bandwidth to kind of redevelop a graduate school of education on how to teach in this space. So I just throw that out there too. If we're going to eliminate the achievement gap, this is a huge thing to think about, how we train teachers differently, how we teach differently, how we leverage resources differently, how we partner with parents. It's going to be a much different school. And so I think at Rocketship, we're continually innovating and pursuing that path to figure out what that school is going to look like, so we really can scale it and have high quality.
Have you figured out who's left? We're going to actually ask Pablo and Sarah the same question, which is just wanting to hear a little bit more about why you all have chosen to focus where you have on the K-12 student continuum, right? So we heard that Sarah, starting with 3-year-olds, and is focusing on taking it all the way back to even prenatal. And obviously Pablo in a high school, kind of hearing a little bit about that. I'd love to just hear why that end, and why is that part of the continuum so important to the work that we do?
Yeah, I think in regards to the particular population I work with, most of our students come into the country after the age of 12. And so they're entering systems that are often not prepared for them, as I mentioned before. But part of the problem with the systems goes to town, that there's teachers and there are adults in the space that are not ready to really meet the needs. Our students really are coming with a lot of social emotional needs. And so our model is actually built around trying to address not only academic needs, but social emotional needs through not just the advisory, having one person or a group of 10 students tied to one adult, but also through really helping them to the transition to the country and giving them soft skills and hard skills on what it means to be in school. And so the majority of our students actually receive therapy, in which we have 6 social workers and staff for a small group of students. And they really do, we go out our way to ensure that kids, when they're coming in, are receiving some sort of, they're being able to process what's happening as they enter. That's allowed us to even include 40 families in family therapy on site. And so we partner with Good Shepherd Services to provide real therapy on site for these particular students, Because in most cases, a lot of our kids are coming without their parents. Their parents were here before the students arrived, so we do a lot of reunification. You can imagine coming, be raised by your grandparents, and then living with your mother or father who has this positional authority but doesn't really have informal authority over you at a time of high transition between 12 and 13. And then we do a lot of training with our teachers that they understand that they're there and responsible for their content, the academic learning, but they're also there to navigate the social emotional development of our students. And so we seek people who have that background. Many of our teachers have a social work background or have worked in agencies that dealt with students who are marginalized or disadvantaged at an adolescent age. And then we also begin to do a lot of our training. We partner with Ramapo and other agencies to really train our educators to say you're addressing the whole child. And so the very way that you approach the classroom is in regards to trying to meet students where they're at, provide safe structures, not take punitive structures in terms of addressing students. Compliance is not our goal. It really is trying to meet students, and we do a lot of what we call guided discipline, talking to students outside and helping navigate why did you act, respond that way. And so I think for many schools, they're not really prepared to address students who, we have 13-year-old, 14-year-olds who have never been in school, so one kid takes away their pencil, and they've never no strategies from kindergarten to address that. And so what our student did was punch the face of the other kid when they took the pencil. And they're like, they took my pencil, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, I know, as opposed to really doing practices in which we would suspend or take a harder stance, we take that as a learning opportunity to say like, yes, there's a consequence obviously for punching your fellow student, but let's dig deeper into that. And they receive a 45-minute therapy session around what that anger felt like and what you do in situations which you have to navigate frustration or anger, because many of our students don't. And so that requires a lot of real professional development and a commitment from an entire group of adults to address a particular need.
There's a professor at the University of Texas who really analyzes achievement results, and he's dug in and he's noticed that a lot of the high-performing charter schools, again, they are leaps and bounds above where the neighborhood schools where the children would otherwise go to. And so they're getting amazing results. But then when you map that against children in wealthier parts of Austin, you see that the gap is even huger than we even imagined. And it's pretty discouraging to think we've come so far and yet we have so much further to go. So for me, part of that is trying to close the gap as early as possible, because we know that children, even 3-year-olds, are going to come to school with significant gaps. And it's not just about looking at it from a deficit-based mentality, because they bring obvious strengths as well, but really thinking about the gaps that exist in terms of vocabulary and just different ways of entering school and being prepared for school. This also really hit home for me when I started preparing to get pregnant with my first child, and 8 months before I wanted to start trying, I was exercising and getting healthy and just doing all this research about how some children are disadvantaged even in the womb. And it just complicated this whole achievement gap for me and really made us commit to wanting to start with children as young as possible. And as I said, that even looks like high quality childcare options for families that are choosing to put their children into daycare as infants and toddlers. We want to make sure that they have high quality options available to them as young as possible.
All right, it's your turn. So just raise your hand if you have a question. Hillary, is there any way you can help? Oh, Hillary, who you can see in the back, red shawl, has a microphone. She will come to you. Just say your name. If you have a question for a particular person, just say who it's for and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Lauren Carter-Greger, and I work for LA Unified. I guess just with all of your approaches, some of them are very different than kind of what we hear with the normal traditional charter school, and I don't want to lump them all together, but we're going to do this better than the neighborhood schools have been doing. And so I'm just curious how you guys approach getting like the political buy-in and support for these various models. in different places that you guys are in, and particularly also in Pablo, like working with the district to actually open a school with a different approach?
So let's have Pablo and then maybe one other person so we can get more questions.
I believe that districts, especially at the high school level, need to take on a portfolio-based sort of approach that we're offering different sort of needs as students enter, and this is probably true for K through 12, because not every single school is going to be the right fit for every single kid. And so I do think that especially when you're dealing with more niche populations, that it's a space where you can be really creative. At that point, during the Bloomberg reform, there was a realization that we had not addressed this population, and so they were seeking new models, and that was the way they presented it to me. We're open and really willing to do new things because what we're doing is not working. And so the district actually approached me, and part of what I had to do was address the larger community on the campus of why having a school for these particular students is important, as opposed to further segregating. Because there's often thought that if we put these students in our mainstream classes, that's what's better because we're no longer segregating our students and we're giving the opportunity for them to speak English and everyone should just speak English. What we found is that that's not working for them because they were not feeling necessarily safe to speak English or really welcomed or their needs were not being met. And so once you start getting traction, you really see success, which we saw early on through our attendance rates, through our retention rates, through our first exams or Regis exams. Then you begin to give a narrative like this is something new. We realize that it's not a model for everything, but we are trying to address this particular issue, and then showing those results and really begin to advocate for the particular students, saying here are additional resources we need to really carry out this model from the district. And then in our second and third year began to really address this with the Office of Portfolio Planning or other schools. Of here are things that we're seeing work within our particular population that might be transferable to other schools, and sharing that knowledge helps demystify a little bit of what you're doing within your schools. And I really believe that the Office of Portfolio Planning did a great job of trying to have us share what are best practices. And so in districts and in charter schools, creating spaces for us to share those best practices, so we begin to demystify a little bit what's happening within school sites.
So I'll start off by saying this is, you probably know, because LA Unified is very political. I didn't realize how political this was. I thought I was running schools and helping kids, and this is very political work. There are real interests at stake, and there's real money, and there's real powerful players in this world, so it's been really fascinating, so I'm going to put that out there. What we do at Rocket Ship, and if you pay attention to media, we're definitely kind of in the top 5 targets of certain groups right now, so we feel the heat, but we believe in community engagement, so if parents want something and they organize, typically that's going to carry the day, and I think we've seen a lot of evidence of that. Even with the heat we're currently facing from a lot of interests and groups. 3 weeks ago, we had 2 unanimous votes. So we had a 7-0 vote in favor of opening a school and a 5-0 vote in favor of opening a school. We got our facilities entitled, which if you've ever got a facility entitled, you'll know that takes 3 to 4 votes in California. I mean, it's very political. And so we believe in partnering with parents, investing in their leadership, ensuring they have access to public officials, and then if they organize, especially at grassroots level, things that are going to come about. I would also say, I think we're all responsible for this in this room through like 2 thoughts. One is engaging deeply with community and really partnering with parents and community. I think we all can do better, especially classroom teachers at schools. Like, it's something we've got to be really serious about. I think the second thing is the debate has become really there's a lot of vitriol. It's become really nasty this year, in my opinion. We're all in public education, district, charter. Everybody is doing amazing work and working hard for kids. And I guess I'd say at some point, everyone in this room is going to have an opportunity to make a stand and say to somebody, hey, like, you know, tone it down, or we're all in this together and figure out how we can partner, or to kind of continue to push the vitriol. And I would just say, like, I don't think it's helping right now, especially when a lot of the folks who are pushing the vitriol don't send their kids to our schools, don't live in our neighborhoods, and yet they're the voice and really kind of pushing this whole debate around public education. So I would just say, like, I think we, especially within Teach for America, have a real opportunity to lead on this front in both ways, and hopefully we'll step up and do it.
My name is Trish. I was a 2007 core member. This question is for Sarah. You talked a little bit about cultural responsive instruction at your schools. I have two questions. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and also for someone who's working at a school where we don't talk about that a lot, can you provide some advice of how we can create buy-in for that and also support new and veteran teachers in this idea?
It's something that we're just beginning as we're starting our school in 3 weeks. When we were hiring, we were intentionally hiring for people who had a willingness and an openness to engage in culturally responsive practices, which helps us from the beginning to have that openness. It looks like taking a long, hard look at the curriculum and the ways in which it is not culturally responsive, and digging in and saying, okay, what are the new lessons? What are the books? What are the resources? I mean, every time we make a materials list, we look at it through this a more informed lens of like, how is this or is this not affirming our children's identities? So it's just it's a constant. It has to be at the forefront of our minds. It's also something that we've had to focus on at the board level. We had to intentionally recruit board members. We have some faculty from the University of Texas who specialize in culturally responsive education, and we have some people from the national staff of Teach for America who are also focusing on this. So having that conversation at the board level then forces it to trickle down, and when we're setting our metrics as a board around diversity and cultural responsiveness, it infiltrates everything that we're doing. So it has to kind of work at all levels of the organization. It's definitely, it's such an important thing to prioritize. It's hard to keep it at the very top of the agenda sometimes. It's just really important work to keep pushing forward.
Just looking to see how much more time. Okay. So how many? Okay. All right, so let's find the next question.
Hi, my name is Roxanne Williams, 93 core member from Los Angeles. Shout out to old school. My question is this, regarding charters and your best practices. What best practices that you've implemented at your sites can actually be duplicated and replicated in a public school system? The reason why I ask this question is San Bernardino City Unified School District, in which I work, is known to be charter friendly. We have a lot of charters, not a lot of high performing charters. One of my tasks was to visit several charters and to come back and make recommendations on best practices that could be transferred into public schools. And I was really enthusiastic. I came back and I said, wow, this one charter, they have high expectations, 80% are above on their standards, or the students retest, and they go and work after school, they come to Saturday school, intersession, and I was shot down and told, sorry, we can't do that, we can't replicate that. And I said, well, what about, practice number 2? They do X, Y, Z. And I was shot down and told the unions would fight us every step of the way. So my question to you once again is, what best practices from your charters can be actually implemented in a public school?
Let's actually start with Christy, and then if anyone else wants to jump in.
I think the expanding of the definition of academic excellence is actually something that can be applied anywhere, right? So thinking about the social emotional aspects and thinking about things, and again, I get a little nervous because in no way do I mean diminishing academic performance. Like that absolutely, we have to transcend this definition, but we have to include everything we've already decided that we're gonna work on. But I think that, I'll give you an example in our kindergarten class, right? So speaking about how polarized the discussion that we have as adults is, and sometimes I feel like all we're really doing is saying, hey, here are all these problems that hold us up as adults, let's try to create curricular make curricular decisions for our kids where they won't have to face these problems. 5-year-olds spend a lot of time talking about the way they feel, right? And they talk about how when they react to their emotions, the impact it has on someone else. And they spend a lot of time actually trying to figure out, at 5, what are ways that they can get ahead of some of these reactions and not damage relationships so they don't actually destroy potential for collaboration. So we have peace corners. And kids can get up and go to the peace corner and there's like lavender spray and some music or whatever. We probably should have these at my office too, but we don't. And kids can sit in there and actually take a moment to think of themselves, get themselves together before they come back. We have teachers looking at social emotional maps as part of the pilot. So kids answer questions about who they're connected with within the class. Teachers answer questions about their observations, and these maps are created. And you can see where what students are connected to what students are not connected to anyone. What students are totally disconnected and isolated. And if you overlay that with academic achievement, what do you learn? Or if you look at a specific classroom and all the connections are around performance lines, or lines of race, or lines of class, what does that mean for the professional development and the support that you'll give in the coming year? And I think that stuff can be happening everywhere. I think that there are not many people out there actually looking at that at the same level of priority that they are academics. And so the more we find people who are doing great stuff and dedicating their lives to studying it, the more we're anxious to pilot measures so we can actually come up with concrete ways to say this is what success looks like.
And as leading a district school, the first 2 years, other schools in our building joked around that we were a charter school and thought we were a charter school. And the reality is that it's a fake sort of dichotomy that this is charter and this is district. And so I think focusing your efforts on finding leaders that are trying to really implement best practices, because even within the New York City Department of Education's contract and UFT contract, you're able to carry out high expectations. You're able to really be creative with your schedule. It doesn't look like one schedule is going to fit all. We're able to create advisories, additional intervention times, really look at ways to bring procession or other things that may help to extend the school day. Because there are grants out there, there are real opportunities for districts to look and say, we can extend the school day. And maybe it's not tied to the expectation as part of your salary, but it can be part of per session or per diem or other work that comes with other models that districts use to pay their employees. And so I think it really looks like finding the right talent of leaders that are going to enter schools and say, hey, we're going to run with these expectations of the best practices that work regardless of whether you are a charter, district, or all public. And making sure that they really are carrying that message, that we're not going to be dictated by being mediocre or by the union or anything else, because these are not things that are oppositional. We're going to be dictated by our performance and what's best in the interest of students. And so I think leveraging maybe the talent of the principals in your school district.
I'm happy to talk after too. So it's close to home, San Bernardino, so I'm happy. I'm happy. I got some ideas. I think we got a lot.
I think we're going to take someone from the back, brave soul from the back.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Lacey Tomanik, and I work in the Dallas-Fort Worth region of Teach for America. And I think this is probably best addressed to Christy, but I'm happy to hear from any of you. What would your advice be to somebody who wants to create some kind of option like this in their community and really still value socioeconomic diversity and create the kind of school you would want your own kids to go to, and yet still stay true to that, like, I want to serve majority low-income students, offer them the kind of place that puts them on a different life trajectory? How do you navigate that tension? Or is it a tension? I don't know.
I don't know that has to be a tension, right? I think that there can be places where there is absolute focus on achievement while expanding the definition of academic excellence, while looking very closely at what it means to have an integrated school. I think the most important thing is just to come together with that founding group of people who are as dedicated and passionate as you are. And to kind of circle back a little bit to this point of these lines that don't really exist, I think it's a great idea to start that conversation in whatever traditional system you exist in. Because I didn't choose charter schools because I had some large affinity for charter schools at the time. This was a long time ago, but there wasn't another path to kind of pull together all of these variables and create the schools that we want. But we're hungry for an opportunity to create something that's more of a new way, a third way, a hybrid, something because I do think that part of what's going to hold us back from new models and from closing the achievement gap and from everything we're all trying to accomplish is how polarized things have become, because at the pretty basic level, I think we're all in this for very similar reasons at the core. And I think it's okay to disagree on how exactly to get there if we can not be disagreeable with one another in the process.
Great. I think one more.
Hi, I'm Anna Russo. I am a Memphis 2010 alum. And I work in the school turnaround, well, the Achievement School District, which is a state-run district, for the Achievement Schools, which is the direct run schools. So this question is for Preston. I work in recruitment and hiring, and as we're trying to create these diverse options for the kids that we serve in Memphis, it's kind of hard to hold on to our teachers, right? Sometimes the teacher retention rate is low. And it sounds like, you know, y'all are doing a lot of things like when I started out in a first year charter where things are changing constantly, right? And you're trying things out to see if it works with the kids. So I wanted to know, knowing that teachers are the most important thing to hold on to provide these options for students and families, what you all do at Rocket Ship to really retain your teachers, to provide them with the employee satisfaction that they need to stay so that we can provide these options for these communities.
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to say too, it's still hard. It's still hard for us. The reality for teaching, right, is 3 to 5 years, 50% of teachers leave, and that's for districts or charters or wherever. I mean, we've all done it, right? It is a tough profession. I think there's really kind of 3 things that we focus on. The first is really to ensure, well, I guess I'll go to 4. The first is the culture of our schools. So a lot of studies show that if teachers love who they work with and feel that similar culture, that passionately we're all in this together, kind of rowing in the same direction, and they're gonna stick around. And so I think that's the first thing of really having that Rocket Ship culture of, you know, we are 110% in this for our kids and our families, and to make sure that we can eliminate the achievement gap. And I think that makes a big difference. And it's hard to describe that if you haven't worked in that environment. You know, I didn't understand it until I had the district school that I founded, and it's been what, 10, 11 years since I've been back in a district setting where we weren't all rowing in the same direction. So it just feels very different. The second thing I'd say is voices heard. We have a staff satisfaction survey every twice a year. Our teachers get a ton of questions, put a lot of comments. I read every single one of those comments. I look at all the data. We share the data back, so we literally send it back and say, here's everything you said. It's not filtered, it's not kind of screened. And so I think people really feeling heard, and I spend a lot of time at the schools and do things with the teachers. So I think them just really feeling like they have access, they have input, I think makes a big difference. And then the 2 other things, I think one, I mean, flat out is compensation. Folks want to be paid in a manner that is similar to what they're doing in the schools, and so we pay more than the local schools, and we try to be really competitive, and we're hoping to pay more and more over time as well. So we pay 20 to 30% more than surrounding schools, which I think makes a difference. And then the last thing is career path. So we really try to create paths for folks. If you want to be a school leader, like there is definitely a path. If you want to be a long-time tenured teacher, there's a path. So there's just very clear paths, and I think folks want to have access to that, especially really talented folks, rather than saying, well, if you teach for 10 years, maybe you can then be like a dean, and then 5 more years you can be an assistant principal, and then 5 more years be a principal. So I think just access to having a real clear path, that really has helped retention as well.
All right, so we have one final question for everyone. We're gonna, I think, mix it up and start with Carson and come down this time. And I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. So you guys are gonna have carte blanche, right? Like, what is this room of people, right? What is the thought you wanna share with them? Or is it a request you wanna make of them? What is the thing you would want to leave them with or ask of them? As they think about walking out of this session, asking themselves, what have I learned? What more do I want to learn about? What commitment am I going to make? What are the things you want to share with them or ask of them? So we'll start with Preston and then come down.
You didn't even prep us. That's a good question.
Come join Rocket Ship. No. I guess what I'd say is this is doable. Like, this is really challenging work. Everybody here knows this, but I think we're in the middle of something really powerful right now. Usually in times of real innovation and real change, especially a very large public system like public education right now, you see what's going on right now, a lot of models, you see a lot of tension, you see a lot of conflict. So I think we're actually, as uncomfortable as it may be, there's immense opportunity right now. And I guess what I'd say is, you know, enjoy the tension, because we're, as Teach for America, after 20 years, God bless 93, 92, 91, have incited a conversation that really is going to transform outcomes for kids. And so I'd say, you know, find your place, because there's a great opportunity, and stay in the movement, stay in education, and let's eliminate the achievement gap.
I would probably go back to this idea of expanding the way that we define excellence in education. And I think in doing that, we will naturally start talking about a broader set of skills and outcomes. I think we'll start talking about joy and compassion and maybe even love a little bit in doing that. But I think it's also going to force us to talk about going forward together. And I think that down to the language we use in this room, at this conference, outside of this conference, I don't really think we're in a battle, right? I think sometimes we choose to battle on all kinds of things. But I think that we can be very conscious of not just including all of the different characteristics that maybe are underrepresented in excellent education, but we can be very thoughtful about doing that, truly doing that from a spirit of doing it together. And I think that it's going to be important for us, not just for our kids, but for us actually within this room. Because I was moved a little bit by what Matt said this morning, that there are so many movements that have almost had their moment and then haven't. And I don't want to see ours go through 100 years of waiting, because I don't think we can afford it.
I guess my challenge to all of us would just be to really think about what it's going to take for our children to be not only prepared for high school, and not only prepared for college, and not only prepared for the 21st century workplace, which we can only begin to imagine, but to also be prepared for life beyond in their families and in their communities. And once you envision that and what it takes to be reach your fullest potential in all of those capacities, what does it need to look like in the classroom, day in and day out, so that children are getting the kind of practice that they need for all of those situations and the world beyond. Because it takes a lot to develop integrity and courage and perseverance and collaboration and time management and executive functioning. I mean, all the things you need out in the world, and we need to be providing our children with opportunities to practice all of those things every single day from the day they enter school.
And I guess I'm just going to end with saying, be a champion and advocate for those that are the most marginalized within our already marginalized communities. And I think of this sort of situation in which we have so many Central Americans who are coming, students who are coming and trying to find a space or hope in the way that our country interacts with them. And many of our students don't really have parent advocates, don't necessarily have the voice that's needed, and therefore going to district schools or sometimes not going to school at the high school level. And to really find solutions that are going to address all the students within our communities. So I really just hope that you become a champion of the most marginalized within already marginalized groups of young people.
All right, Pablo brought us home. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to all of you. So I guess I would say, what are the things you all have learned? What are the things that you want to learn more about? What are the commitments you want to make to be thinking about those things? Can you all please help me say thank you to all these amazing people? I know each one of you has you have me now in a fan club. As a father of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, you're like pushing my thinking about my own kids' schooling. I have a feeling you have 200 new fans in the room today. So thank you. Some of these people have somewhere else to go right after this. So if you could just respect that, if you see them bolting, it's probably not because they don't actually want to talk to you, it's because they're going to talk to another group. And some people might be able to hang around. So thank you.